Welcome to the Holding Time podcast, where we share inspiring stories from remarkable mothers who participated in the Holding Time project in Bradford. Each episode, we explore their unique breastfeeding stories, the highs, the lows, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you're expecting, a new parent, or simply curious, we invite you to hear from these resilient warrior women as they share their experiences. Find out more at holdingtime.org.
I've got my baby here. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's good. You like babies?
Yeah, I thought so. Yes. So my name is Clare and I've got 2 children, a boy and a girl.
And what ages are they?
4 and 4 months.
So I can see you're still breastfeeding.
Yeah, it's going good. We've kind of got over a lot of the hurdles that we had, and it just seems to be going just really good now.
So how was breastfeeding for you in the beginning with your first? How did that go?
It was pretty much non-existent, really. When I had my little girl, just as I'd kind of delivered her, I was quite unwell after delivery. So it was not really like a great priority to be having like skin to skin with her and things like that for the initial couple of hours. And then when I did get time with her, I physically just wasn't really well enough to get established with her. So for the first 24 hours in hospital, I tried to feed her like laying down because I had some really bad headaches after delivery and I could only lay down really. So I had a lot of support trying to feed her laying down, but it just wasn't something that was like even on my mind to feed her. And I think because of like what happened in delivery and things, I was quite hypervigilant, quite worried about feeding her and quite worried about like the midwives and the health professionals like saying, oh, she needs a feed. So we just went and got some formula straight away. And that's pretty much how it went. When we did come home and we was discharged, compared to this experience, I never really got full breasts, never really had any kind of like pain or tenderness or engorgement. I genuinely think that my body just didn't bring in my milk because my birth was centered around adrenaline rather than like oxytocin, really. So I just didn't have any fullness at all. There were no milk coming in. That's my memory of it, and compared to this experience.
So you mentioned like that was a difficult birth. I wanted to ask, just pre that, like in your pregnancy, in that first pregnancy, were you thinking about breastfeeding? Was it like on your agenda, or was it something that came up after the birth?
No, 100% wanted to breastfeed. I'd always worked in children's centres with under 5s. So I'd actually done some breastfeeding, like peer support training. And it was something that I really wanted to do, knew about the benefits for mum and baby and just the overall like convenience, bonding, all that attachment stuff. Just thought it was something that I would just do without question of a doubt. So we went to some parent education classes at the hospital where we delivered in Bradford. And the infant feeding team there just said, if you really want to feed, don't bring any formula, don't bring any cartons of like the milk, because then it just means that you might persist with your attempts to feed and things like that. So followed that advice and we didn't take anything to the hospital. And then that's where it kind of like led to a little bit of panic and fear because we didn't have anything and I wasn't feeling great. And I think we managed to borrow like 1 carton of milk to feed. And then I just kind of like went into a bit of a panic and a bit of a meltdown about, oh gosh, she needs to feed. Like there'd been talk of her not feeding and looking a bit yellow, and the way that I was feeling and things, it was just like, oh, let's just get some formula. So that's what we did. So yeah, it was the total opposite of what I thought and what I hoped I would have been able to do.
Did you have an emergency C-section?
No, I didn't. I was 2 weeks overdue. I had an induction that I didn't really want, but complied because it was like my first baby and, just followed kind of like the instructions of what we had by. Went in on the Monday, got induced in the morning and delivered her on the Friday.
Wow.
So it was a real long week of being induced and it not working really. It was classed as a failed induction, just didn't progress at all until the Thursday when I was just kind of pumped with all the drugs that you can have and had my waters broke. And then, she was delivered on the Friday. So when I talk about like being well afterwards, it was complete exhaustion really. That's what led me to becoming unwell because we'd been in the hospitals like such a long time and not really slept. And you can understand like why they use sleep deprivation as like a means of like torture really. So we wasn't in the best position when she was delivered. So I managed to deliver vaginally when she was delivered, but we just were then treated after delivery almost immediately for sepsis. And I think that was just down to, I don't know, possibly examinations. And
so you had sepsis, did you?
Yeah, so in post-delivery.
God, so is that why you had headaches?
Well, the reason I had the headaches is because when they broke my waters on the Thursday morning and gave me the oxytocin drip, things literally went from like 0 to 100 and I wasn't dilating, but like I was contracting. So it was decided that they needed to turn the drip off because it wasn't having the desired effect. So then the pain was just crazy, like through the roof. And they attempted to do an epidural to give me the pain relief. And it didn't work the first attempt. So I had a further 3 attempts and none of them worked. So post-delivery, the anaesthetist told me that I had something called tap headaches, which is when they inject into your spine for the epidural, they create like a puncture wound. And if you've had like the one epidural and then you get the headaches, they know where the puncture wound is and they can draw blood and put it into the puncture and it creates a clot. I believe it stops like the release of like the spinal fluid, which is causing a headache. But because I had 4 puncture holes, they didn't know which puncture to repair in that sense, in probably very different in terms of medical language jargon, but they didn't know which puncture to repair. So it was a case of just ride it out. So it was about 3 or 4 days of these tap spinal headaches. It was just a minefield because then you try to medicate for the headaches, but half of the medications that I was taking, like the tramadol and all the other things, they can give you headache as well. So it was just an absolute nightmare, really. Plus, I'd been treated for sepsis and I'd had a sepsis bundle, so God knows what's in that. It's probably full of drugs that just make you feel horrendous. So when I say it came from a place of like adrenaline and not natural hormones, I think that's what led to the absolute exhaustion and just being unwell afterwards.
How long did it take you to recover from all of that?
Well, after I was discharged and I got home, I never came down. I was just hyper vigilant and just in a state of fight or flight. And my partner and my mum knew that. So then it took a couple of weeks for me to kind of settle down and kind of like come back to kind of like earth a little bit. But then I never really got better. I was still very, very hypervigilant and very panicky and worried about things. So I actually got referred to SMABS, which is the Specialist Mother and Baby Service, which was amazing. And I stayed under their care for a year to help me kind of like process and understand what had like happened because I couldn't remember anything. That was the biggest thing. It kind of took a lot of my memory away. So they were brilliant. And I had EMDR therapy with them. And I had that for a year, once a week.
So did you have PTSD?
Yes. So after quite a few doctor's appointments and things like that, I just wasn't really getting anywhere because they wanted to prescribe antidepressants for postnatal depression. And I was open to that, but I couldn't remember anything. So I was saying, I can't remember like what's happened. And I remember like asking my partner like every detail, like what happened on this day, or what happened at this time, or what was I wearing, or what were you wearing, or like what did we eat? I was just desperate to know any detail to like make me remember. And I think that's where the diagnosis came from, that it wasn't just postnatal depression. It was this hunger to find out like what had happened. And I'd watch like Unborn every minute to like think, was that the scenario that I was in? Or I was like, is that what the room looked like? Or is that like what happened? You know, like really trying to piece it together myself. And I was never going to be able to do that. So that's where this referral and this service stepped in and made me get well again. So they were absolutely amazing. And yeah, that was the diagnosis that I got from that.
And would you say then that you had postnatal depression as well, or was it PTSD and not postnatal depression?
I think it was more postnatal anxiety.
My understanding is that those two are very closely linked, you know, like it can manifest as anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
But it's a sort of like you said, hypervigilant, heightened state of, well, it can manifest in a number of different ways, can't it?
Yeah. I think the depression kicked in once I started on some antidepressant medication because of like the side effects of it. So I'd gone from like being hypervigilant and like being kind of manic really, to the medication kicking in, and then that being kind of like being a bit like a zombie because the medication was doing exactly what it needed to do. It was calming me down, but that came out in depression really. So yeah, it was a bad time, and my family and my friends really had to like step in and look after us. And my partner, you know, he was in the same position as me. He was there. He was just as like sleep deprived and just kind of like in a state of shock that I was.
But he didn't have the physical pain, and that physical pain could be what made you disassociate, because if the pain was really extreme, it's kind of the body's way of coping psychologically is to just remove you from the situation mentally.
Yeah, my brain did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was just like shut down and go black.
But then that leaves you with a bit of a legacy to deal with in terms of, well, I imagine the second birth, you had to be very courageous to go through birth again, having experienced that.
Yeah, so honestly, if I hadn't have got referred and accepted by the SMABS team, I honestly think I probably wouldn't have had another baby, or I wouldn't be well, and I would have just been in a cycle of depression for a long time, not getting any answers, and kind of just being a statistic that's, you know, lives on antidepressants and never really gets the answers. And then God forbid, like what that might have turned into in terms of like attachment and, you know, trauma and things like on through to children. Like, you know, what is that cycle? You know, it's a dreadful thing. So my second pregnancy, I felt really confident going into it because I knew that if I needed to, I could have been referred to SMABS again, antenatally. And I'd processed it all. I'd been through the therapy. So I'd kind of like, the way that the therapist, who was amazing, described it to me, and how I understand it now is getting on a train, and so like you're looking out the window and you can see green fields, and then all of a sudden you go through a tunnel, and that's like what you can't remember. And then she was like, at the end of it, your train journey will just be like looking out the window. And that's what it did become like. It was unbelievable, like how pockets of my brain like opened up by doing like the processing. I remember like certain sounds and visuals, and I didn't know what they were, or smells. And then all of a sudden I'd be like, oh my gosh, actually, I remember there was a machine in the room that had a flashing light. And this is this light that I can see, like as a flashback, or it totally like opened up and unlocked these memories. And a few years ago, I wouldn't have even able to have like spoken about this at all without, breaking down or kind of just being in turmoil about it. But now that I understand it and I know what's happened, I can just talk about it, like going to do the big shop, if you know what I mean. Still got those feelings around it, but because I've processed them and I've like healed from it, now I see it as a positive, as like, gosh, you can get better. Or like these things do work, and you can be totally in control of like your decisions and advocate for yourself for like your second baby. So yeah.
It's lovely to hear about therapy really working.
Yeah.
I know it's not a cheap solution for the NHS. And, talking about your birth, I mean, I'm not a midwife and I'm not qualified to comment on the treatment that you had. But obviously, if you were 2 weeks overdue, it seems like it would be a normal thing to induce. And I guess there's a level of unpredictability in that, isn't there? And then one thing sort of starts to lead to another. And they put you on the oxytocin drip. Some people I interviewed, they have an induction. It's just really straightforward. And it's like not even 24 hours and they've had a baby. And for you, it just sounds like it was just so difficult. And I'm so happy to hear that the health service was able to repair some of that.
When it happened, my mum works for the NHS for like 43 years now. So when I delivered, she came along to see like, her new grandchild, and pretty much walked in the room and was like, oh my gosh, what has gone on? Like from seeing the amount of people that were in the room, the kind of anaesthetists or consultants that were like in and around the room, walking in and like seeing, I didn't know, or, average Joe wouldn't know, but like she knew that this was a sepsis bundle that I was hooked up to. Baby wasn't there. So she was like, what has gone on? Like, what has happened? And thankfully, she knew one of the consultants and she was able to get a bit of clarity about it. There was never no blame culture like, oh, why did this happen? And why did that happen? And we're just not confrontational like family or me and my partner. And it's not in our nature. So maybe we should have been like, what is going on? Or why is this happening? We just went with it. And when it came to it, it's just what happened, and it was really unfortunate. And we were really lucky that we did get a debrief when I was quite unwell a few months afterwards, and it proved not to be beneficial because I was still not in a place to even understand it. Can't even really remember that first debrief, but it was good for my partner to kind of feel included in the whole recovery of getting better. When I was having Monty, and I was making my decisions about what I wanted to happen, I had another debrief and it was much more beneficial because I was well. And the upshot of it was that it was just service capacity on the wards and in the system. And they did admit fault in areas, I think when you get induced, you should have each part of the induction 6 hours apart. Sometimes it was, way more hours than that. It was 10, 12 hours apart. Was it ever really going to work with the way that things went? And maybe we should have shouted a little bit more and been like, what's going on? What's happening? But
you wouldn't know at the time, unless you had someone with you that was an expert or very experienced. You wouldn't know that this thing should probably start now. And if it hasn't started, that will...
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to me that you didn't have an emergency C-section because it sounded like you were on your way for an emergency C-section, but you did give birth.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that actually, because one of the things that my partner, was able to tell me and really make it clear to me when I was asking, like, what had happened. I'd had my waters broken on the Thursday morning, and then it was like a full 24 hours of like, just things getting out of control. The epidural not working, so then they had to get a drug from the BRI brought over to maternity, remifentanil, I think.
What hospital were you at then?
So I was at Bradford Infirmary, but I don't think it's a drug that they use regularly on maternity, so we had to get like an anaesthetist to come and administer that. And it's like a machine, and you press a button. You can self-administer the drug when it's green, and then it goes to red, and you can't press it when it's red. So when I talk about like visuals of like flashing lights and things, that's what they were that I couldn't unpick. So they'd got this drug and everything else, and then it came to like, you know, my body was really able to relax then. And that's then when I was starting to dilate myself and things started to progress. So when it was coming close to pushing and just using this machine and taking their lead from like what to do, because I can't remember, if I'm honest, and still now, I think there was a theatre team on standby, and they were coming in and they were scrubbing up, and they were saying, right, we're going to have to go, you know, to theatre. And it was a midwife, and my partner was like, I'll never forget this midwife. She came in and she was like, you are not taking this girl to theatre. She's literally like been here since Monday. She's going to have this baby in the next 10 minutes. Like, she's almost, you know, been through enough. Just leave it to us and we'll get this baby here. And if it's not here in the next 10 minutes, take over. So they kind of like went out, and then, you know, they give me a massive pep talk, like, come on, you can do this. I can't remember. So then I had an episiotomy, and then baby was born. So if anything, that was a real positive. Like, my partner was saying, you know, they really stuck up for us. They were wanting to take you off the theatre, and that would have just been a whole other layer. Could you imagine? Like, on top of everything else.
I think emergency C-sections are really tricky. I think if it's a scheduled C-section, it can be like a really calm and quite a pleasant experience. You know, I know there's the recovery afterwards, but certainly it's a hell of a lot different. But when it's an emergency, especially when you've gone through that many days, you know, it's just a big shock to your body, isn't it? I know birth is a big shock, but it's kind of gearing its way up for birth. But on the other hand, I sort of wish to some extent, like when I hear all these sort of stories, I sort of think, God, women are left struggling for a long time, you know, in a lot of pain. And so I'm not someone who's against C-sections, because I think there's really a time and a place for them. And sometimes I sort of think, God, would they just give them to people a bit sooner? You know, if you're 10 minutes away, then really it's like waiting for a bus and then getting a taxi 10 minutes before it arrives, isn't it? It's kind of like no point.
Yeah, literally. And my partner was like, the midwife was literally almost like, get out.
Yeah, well, good for her. I mean, she had faith in herself and in you. And
yeah,
I imagine that there was some level at which you felt better about the fact that you had managed that vaginal birth at the end of all that pain and suffering. But God, I've never heard such a, I mean, it's not that I haven't met women who've had massive impact from their birth, but I've never heard such a story of birth trauma, really. I wanted to ask, was breastfeeding in any way helpful to you in that sort of ongoing recovery process from the first birth? Did it have a role to play?
Yeah, I think it did. I think I just wanted to have the experience of doing it. And it didn't really matter that by doing it with the one baby, it made me feel like I'd given it a good go and I was doing it. So I didn't really have like sadness about the fact that it didn't work out the first time. I actually like spent some time with my little girl also in bed with me, and she was just there as I was feeding, and she was involved in that sense, if you know what I mean.
That's nice.
Kind of felt like we'd like gone full circle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It didn't work out for her the first time. It was nice to see her just kind of like lapping it up and embracing it, like through her brother, and then like just playing with her dolls and things, and like seeing her like mimicking like feeding, you know, just little stuff like that. It was actually nice to feed and then experience that as well.
Because all that beautiful oxytocin and like positivity could be, you know, incredibly beneficial to all of you and your partner, you know.
Yeah, so we just like spent the week kind of doing what we couldn't do with her also first time round, just doing it again with a new baby and her included. And when I was pregnant, we got into a habit of like she'd get in the bath with me quite a lot. So that was lovely because she'd just sit in the bath with me, and obviously I was heavily pregnant. So it felt like she'd been like involved through this whole thread of like being connected to my bump and then being connected to baby when he was here, and then just the whole inquisitiveness around feeding and milk and things, and how like it's so normal to them, and there's like they've just like they're so innocent, aren't they? Like they just ask the most interesting, like gorgeous questions. So yeah, she was definitely like a big part of it.
Oh, that's so nice. It's so great that you're able to do it again, and that it takes courage to do it again. But it sounds like it was because you had that healing experience of getting treatment and getting well that you're able to do it again, and then get even more kind of benefits from doing it again, and it being such a different experience and so much more positive.
Thank you for listening to the Holding Time podcast. We're grateful to everyone involved in this project, including our partners and funders, Bradford District Care Trust and Arts Council England and Better Place Bradford, and all the incredible mothers and families who made it all possible. For more information, visit holdingtime.org. The link is in the episode description. Please like, follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And consider sharing this podcast to help raise awareness and support for breastfeeding.